What I'd like to talk about today are the challenges and the opportunities facing the Canadian churches. And if we look at some of the challenges outside of the churches, the things that are going on in the culture when we think about the church and we think about religion in Canadian society, there are some real challenges. We know on the whole that since World War II, Canadians have decided that attending church is not very important, and the attendance at churches in Canadian society continues to decline. So that today we know that only about 2 out of 10 Canadians attend church on a regular basis. Not only are Canadians attending church less frequently, but they are also saying the church is irrelevant. They're saying that the church doesn't meet their needs. And they are saying that the church is not meeting their families' needs. And while they will tell us that they are spiritual, they will say they are not religious. They will tell us they have spiritual needs, but they don't believe the church is meeting their spiritual needs. And so these become great challenges for the churches in Canada. So if Canadians tell us that they are not religious and they don't attend church very often, what do Canadians mean when they say that the church is irrelevant? What do Canadians mean when they say they are spiritual but not religious? What do Canadians mean when they say that they have these high levels of belief even though they don't participate in the church? I think there are some important opportunities for Canadians when we ask them other kinds of questions about faith. So for example, when we ask them, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he lived, he died, he rose again, and he provides forgiveness of sins? A very orthodox statement that Christians believe. Overwhelmingly, Canadians say they believe that. About 7 out of 10 say so. And not only do they believe that these statements about Jesus, but they also read the Bible. And they also pray on a regular basis. So they're believers even though they don't belong to a local church. I think these are real opportunities for the church to engage with Canadians who see themselves as Christians and believe these very important things, yet are not sure if the church is really there to address their needs. And so some have asked, what would it take to get you back to church? And Canadians have said, what we hope is that the church would be able to address our spiritual needs, that the church would be able to offer us some spiritual guidance on how we can live our lives and the meaning of life and death and how we can make sense of life. And so the opportunity is for the church to address these spiritual questions that many Canadians are asking. And it's important for us to recognize and to see these as great opportunities for the church in Canadian culture today. So while there are challenges and opportunities outside of the churches in the culture, we also know that there are some challenges and opportunities within the church. We've had an opportunity to talk with a lot of leaders and pastors in churches across this country, and we've discovered that there are some real challenges for churches. We seem to be in a period where many pastors are opting to leave the ministry. For some, it's because they feel burned out, and the stress of ministry as the various demands are placed upon ministers and their spouses and their families are causing them to stop and to reflect and to ask whether or not this is something that they really want to be involved in. And so pastors leaving ministry becomes a real challenge for churches. There are other challenges like starting new congregations in local communities that have been very difficult to start, and some church plants have been successful, but there are many church plants that have not been that successful, and so this has raised issues for churches. Related to that is staffing. Many churches are trying to figure out how they staff their churches and whether or not they are able to provide the resources that they need to staff the churches and to run the kinds of programs that they used to run in the past. Related to that really is all of the financial pressures that churches are facing today as we are in the midst of an economic downturn, and some churches have experienced a decline in giving. And so these related challenges of staffing and pastors experiencing stress, along with the financial issues and thinking about how they reach out into communities, pose some real challenges for churches that they need to address. Along with that, we've also discovered that some churches are also facing the challenges of the role of women in ministry, and there has been some tension among some within some churches and among some denominations about what role women play in ministry. And along with that, there are some real issues surrounding youth and the role that youth play in churches today. It seems that the period of youth has expanded from late teens to late 20s, and youth are taking much longer, and it is really more acceptable in our culture for this extended period of youth to be accepted. But along with that, there's a real challenge for churches as they try to find ways to incorporate youth into their churches. When we live in a culture that says, take your time, figure it out, you've got lots of time. And so this is a real challenge for churches of how to get youth interested in church ministry, to be involved and active in youth ministry, recognizing that that youth has changed in our society. And so these pose some real important challenges for churches to face. There are some signs of health in this country, and some Canadian churches have really taken these challenges both outside of the church and inside the church and the opportunities, and have begun to explore ways in which they can more meaningfully engage the culture in which we live in. We see that many churches are de-emphasizing programs. It's not that they're not running programs, it's that they're not focusing so much on recruiting people just to run programs, but they are thinking about how they will conduct their ministry so that they minister to the needs of people. And so not only is there this emphasis away from programs, but along with that there's an emphasis on mentoring people so that their spiritual lives can be nurtured, so that they can learn how to pray, they can learn how to read their Bible, they can learn how to hear the voice of God and to reach out to people that are in need and are asking other very important spiritual questions. And so mentoring is occurring in small groups and in local churches and in communities with pastors and lay leaders and just regular people who are sharing their lives with each other on a regular basis. And we see this as an important sign of health in the churches. And also we're finding that a lot of churches are partnering with each other. They are looking at the needs in their communities, and they're recognizing that they can't meet all of those needs all by themselves. So they partner with other churches, they partner with other ministries, and they find ways to meet the needs as they work together to extend the kingdom of God in Canadian society. I think this is also another important sign of health for the Canadian churches. And so these all become important for us to recognize that yes, there are challenges, but there are real opportunities for the church to find ways to be missional, to be community focused, to partner together, to mentor, to address the spiritual needs that Canadians are asking. And I believe that as Canadian churches focus on these challenges, that they respond to these opportunities and these difficulties, that the church will find themselves in a very good place for the future. No doubt there are some real challenges that the churches are facing in Canadian society. We know that churches are facing drastic changes internally. We know that outside of the church, Canadians are very busy, that they see the church as irrelevant. At the same time, there's a lot of hope. Canadians still identify with Christianity. They still feel that faith is important. They identify themselves as being spiritual. They have said that if churches would meet their spiritual needs and help them with some of these questions, that they would respond favorably. And so these become real opportunities for the church. And I pray that you as a leader, whether that be as a pastor or a lay leader, will find an opportunity to discuss these and how you might engage community, how you might begin to think about partnering with other churches to address the spiritual needs all around you. There are great signs of health and hope and opportunity for the church in Canadian society.